Hey, it's Dr. Karen. Today we are going to talk about morphology and its impact on spelling and what you can do as the SLP to build your students' spelling skills and why morphology is important and why it might be important a lot earlier on than you think. So a lot of people think that number one, SLPs should not be working on spelling, that it's not within our scope. And number two, a lot of people think that when it comes to morphology, this is a skill for older students, that maybe we don't need to work on it until late elementary school or junior high. And that this is something, again, that is for older students, not something that we should be working on when kids are in, let's say, kindergarten, first grade. And today I wanted to put some of those myths to rest, because the truth is that SLPs can have a big impact on our students' spelling skills. And the way that we can do that is to incorporate morphology into our vocabulary work. And actually, we can do this a lot earlier than we think. It's not something that we have to wait for students to fail in order to start intervening. And we don't necessarily have to worry that our students aren't ready for it, that it's too hard for them, because actually a lot of these skills start to develop earlier than we think, even as early elementary school. So I wanted to just share a quick case study as we get going here that really illustrates an example of how this can have an impact and what might happen if we ignore morphology. So a lot of us know that phonological awareness is really important. There are now, maybe not necessarily a long time ago, but now there are a lot of phonological awareness interventions that are embedded within curriculums. So things like blending and segmenting. So for example, you say k, at, and the student has to blend those sounds together and tell you that you said the word cat. Or the opposite, where you say the word and then they've got to segment the sounds apart. And that's great, especially in those early grades. But the thing is that those phonological skills, while they're super important, they are something that actually fits within morphological awareness skills. And to be able to spell really robust words that start to come into text, even as early as third grade, we've got to start building those morphological awareness skills as early on. We've got to start building that foundation, especially because a lot of students, while some curriculums don't address morphology early on in the early grades, your students are starting to pick up on those skills. And then the reason that some students pick up on that and have those skills while others don't, and they end up okay, even though they didn't really have a lot of direct work on morphology, is just simply because they're more meta. They are a little bit more aware of those little pieces, those different word parts and things like that. So they don't necessarily depend on that explicit instruction, but we know that our students on our caseload, if they have been identified as having a language disorder, if they maybe haven't had a language disorder diagnosis, but maybe you're keeping an eye on them, you know that they have some processing issues and they're struggling to learn to read and write and spell, we know that those students tend to need more explicit instruction. They don't just pick up on things as quickly. So they need us to point out those different patterns in words. And while a lot of curriculums really focus on letter sound correspondence, they don't necessarily focus as much on morpheme correspondence and what morphemes mean. So let me just show you an example of why this is so important to being able to decode words. So I'm actually going to pop a blog post in the comments so that you can follow along here. And I'll be looking up at my screen up here because I've got two monitors going right now. But just to show you how important it is to have that quick recall. When we are reading, we need to be able to decode words quickly, like boom, like see the word, recognize it right away. If we spend a lot of time sitting there thinking about the word and thinking, like sounding it out, then that takes up a lot of cognitive resources and we don't have a lot left for high-level comprehension. So that means that our phonological skills need to be solid, and then our morphological skills need to be solid so that we can quickly decode like that and have that quick recognition so that we can pay attention to the big picture of what we're reading. Now, if you are focusing solely on phonemic awareness, then you may be missing out on work that's actually going to impact students on more difficult words. So let's take, for example, when we are teaching our students to decode words, we want to give them word attack strategies so that they can see a word that maybe they haven't seen before in print that maybe isn't automatic yet, and give them problem-solving skills to be able to decode it. Because as they see those similar patterns over and over again, they're going to be able to apply that to other words and so on, and have a strategy for looking at a word and figuring out what it is. Now, I know that there are some strategies out there that aren't necessarily effective. A lot of times people will say, look at the picture in the book. Well, a good portion of words can't be decoded by looking at a picture. That's not actually showing you how to problem solve and look at the word itself and decode it. I've even seen other strategies like ask an adult for help. And it's like, okay, how is that teaching a student to read? It's not. It's just teaching them to go ask somebody else for the answer, which I guess in certain situations might be a good thing to do, but it doesn't teach you how to read. It might teach you how to be resourceful and get people to answer your questions, but again, doesn't teach you how to decode. So we need, in order to be good at decoding, we need to teach students to decode. So that means to use the information in the actual print symbol itself. Now, the other thing that comes up is to be able to figure out what the word is from context. The problem with that is that a lot of times context clues, like it just takes so long for you to look at the entire sentence and figure out what it is. There aren't a lot of clues that actually will help you to figure out how to pronounce that word. If you don't have a good phonological representation of the word, you haven't seen it before, the chances of you being able to figure it out from context are relatively low. And again, it doesn't teach you how to decode using that word, because a good portion of the time, the context is not going to be enough. Now, sometimes you might be able to, if you are able to decode the word and you're still not quite sure what it means, then you can use context clues to figure out some things about the semantic meaning of the word, but it's not as helpful when you're trying to learn how to decode. A lot of times people kind of jump on that context clue strategy and use it as a panacea for everything. And that's not, while it is a good strategy some of the time, it's not something that we want to overuse, especially when students are beginning readers. We want to teach them those word attack strategies, because what's going to happen, the more words they can decode in the passage, the more likely it is that they're going to be able to infer meanings of unfamiliar words and get the bigger picture. If students don't know at least 90 to 95% of the words in the passage that they're reading, they're not going to have that comprehension. So we've got to give them something that's going to help them be able to decode words as quickly as possible. So let's think about words that are really short. So words that only have one morpheme. Let me go to a word like hat. Okay, you see the word hat. There are 3 different phonemes in the word at. So that one is pretty easy. There's only 3 different units that you have to remember. Remember, phonemes are linguistic units, and they will give you information about that word. Changing one phoneme in the word, so for example, changing the beginning one to b would make it bat. So that changes the meaning of the word. It's important for students to clue into that phonemic information and have that phonological representation of words. So that's why it is very important in those early grades to teach those phonological awareness skills so that we can teach them to figure out how to decode and problem solve to be able to spell words using the phonemic information in words. Now, the problem with that becomes when we get into words that have multiple morphemes, that strategy of sound it out, think about the sounds and think about the letters becomes less effective because of issues with working memory and just not being able to hold that many units of information in your head at a time. So let's say, for example, a student is figuring out how to spell the word hat. We can say to them, okay, you know, think about the sounds and think about the letters that would go with them. And you can have them, you know, segment the word and think hat, at. Okay, what letter would go with that word? Or what with that sound? Ah. Okay, what letter might go with that sound? T. All right, what letter or letters would go with that sound? So 3 units. It's not that hard to remember 3 units because we've got 3 morphemes in the word that you have to remember to be able to figure out how to spell it. You know, you can, and even we know that a lot of students that we work with, it's hard for them to even hold 3 pieces of information in their head at once, but it's not that hard. It's not as hard as, you know, a longer word. So that works up to a certain extent. The case study I wanted to share was a while back in the language therapy advanced community, a student, meaning an SLP student, one of the language therapy advanced members who was an SLP, posted a question in the group and said, I've got this student, he's coming out normal on all of these phonological awareness assessments, student in 3rd or 4th grade, and he is still struggling to spell. So getting to be in late elementary school, we've been drilling phonological awareness. Why isn't he making progress? Well, 3rd, 4th grade, a lot of the words that you have to spell and read are multimorphemic. So while that strategy might have been helpful for this student to be able to spell words with single morphemes, now that the words are getting harder, you haven't necessarily given him a strategy to take it beyond. And honestly, we probably should have had a strategy in place to start building on some of that morphological knowledge before 3rd grade. But, you know, hindsight is 2020. So let me compare that to a longer word. Let's think of the word, and I'm going to use one of the words that was in the blog post that I shared. So the word retake. So it has, let's segment out the phonemes. R, E, T, A, K. So 5 sounds in the word. So it wouldn't be that hard to use phonemic information to figure out how to spell that word. But think about those students who you have, maybe they do auditory memory tasks. Maybe you have them see if they can repeat 3 or 4 words back to you. And then there's some of those practice tests that have them repeat 5 words. A lot of them can't do it. So a lot of your students are going to have a hard time with 5 units of information and trying to figure out, you know, how to make sense of all of that. Now let's think about it if we broke that word into morphemes. So again, we're talking about the word retake. Let me just type that in the comments as I'm saying this. The word is, word example, retake. Okay, so now let's think about it if we broke it into morphemes. There's 2 morphemes in that word. We've got retake. So is it going to be easier for you to hold 2 pieces of information in your head or 5 pieces of information in your head? Probably 2. So what you can do is break it down into those 2 parts of that word, retake, and then figure out how to spell one part, then the other part. So that means that you might even be, you know, once you're just thinking about you might then, once you're just thinking about that prefix, then you might break it down into phonemes. So, E. Let's think about how we would spell that prefix. And then take. You know, you'd figure out how to spell take. And then once you're just thinking about that unit in the word, then you can think about phonology. So, t, a, k. So that way you can break it down and help your students see patterns. Pointing out those different patterns in words, what that's going to do is over time, once they realize that the word that take as a unit and re as a unit, those can be mixed and matched with other words because they're morphemes. So re can go on other words and impact their meaning. They're going to be aware of that pattern so that they're not going to have to start thinking about it rote and really think through all those steps every time they see it. Eventually, they're going to start noticing those patterns. So you want to point that out whether you're helping a student spell or whether you're helping a student to read a word that they're just seeing. I have some other examples on the blog of even longer words. So I have the word happiness. Obviously, that one would be even harder if you were trying to break it down into phonemes. I don't even know if I could just remember that many sounds in order. And then the other example that I gave is the word unmistakable. So that one has 11 phonemes in that word. Or there you could break it down into morphemes, which would be a lot fewer units, much easier to decode and to analyze so that you can help your students to see those different patterns that come up. So if you want to see how I broke those other two words down, go to that blog post. You can check that out and see the examples there. And then additionally, there are some other spelling rules that I mentioned as I'm breaking those words down that you could point out to your students. And then I also share some links to an additional article, the next article on the blog. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page, there's a little thing that you can click on. It says more, actually, you know what? I'm just going to share the blog post with you, but you can see the next blog post in the series. This other post that I'm going to share here is links to research that actually looked at students' ability to infer meanings of words using morphological knowledge, so using knowledge of prefixes. And students were able to infer meanings of words as early as first grade, meaning that they're starting to clue into that information in early elementary school, so they're definitely ready for it. The whole idea of we've got to wait, this is a skill for older students, it's not, and we know that our students, if we can build those morphological skills, and you'll see in the study the relationship between morphology and reading and decoding, as well as phonological awareness, you'll see that there is a relationship there. So it is something that's important that we want to start working on, especially if we've got those students who we've been doing phonological awareness and we've been doing it until we're blue in the face and students just aren't making progress and we're not quite sure where to go next. Or if we just have those students who we know that they are struggling when it comes to literacy, the chances of them being able to pick up on those types of skills is a lot less than their peers who might be doing well within the curriculum. So you want to be proactive rather than waiting for them to fail and waiting till 3rd or 4th grade and thinking, wow, they're really struggling with morphology. So you want to intervene now rather than later. Your students will definitely be able to handle way more than you think. So that wraps up our live session on morphology. Again, check out those articles from the blog where I break down some words even further when it comes to how to do morphological awareness and morphological analysis, as well as research that shows that this is something that we should be studying with our students. So again, this is in Language Therapy Advanced Foundations. What I do is I show SLPs, a complete system for language therapy, designed to build vocabulary skills with the understanding that those vocabulary skills are going to build the foundation for language processing. What we have found is that when the cognitive load is too great and there are comprehension issues at the word and sentence level, then that causes breakdown and language processing issues, which is what causes those issues with reading comprehension, inferencing, and just overall language functioning. So that's why we start with vocabulary to build that foundation for those language processing skills so that students can respond to intervention, focus on those high-level skills. And we address it from the standpoint of addressing phonology, morphology, orthography, semantics, and syntax. Today, I dove into phonology, morphology, And I didn't talk about it directly, but when you're working on phonology and morphology and you're talking about the way words are spelled, you're also tying in orthography as well. And that is how we can make an impact on our students' spelling skills. So I, in Language Therapy Advanced Foundations, teach SLPs a complete framework for cycling through a set of techniques that address all 5 of those skills. But again, today I dove into one of those specific areas and highlighted morphology. So thanks so much, everybody, for watching. Check out those blog posts and let me know if you have questions.